Hey everyone, today we're going to crack the code on reading music, but we're going to look at it in a completely new way. Let's dive right in. You know that feeling, right? You look at a page of music and it just seems like a jumble of confusing dots and lines. If you've ever felt that way, you are definitely not alone. It can feel totally overwhelming. But what if I told you there's a much simpler way to think about it all? So, let's just toss out that whole secret code idea. Instead, I want you to think of sheet music as a detailed blueprint. Yeah, an architect's plan for building a piece of music. Every single symbol gives you precise instructions, and once you understand the layout of that blueprint, you can build anything. So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the absolute foundation, the musical blueprint itself. Then, we'll decode the treble clef for the high notes and the bass clef for the low notes. After that, we'll put it all together to see how they form the grand staff. And finally, we'll find that one crucial piece, the keystone that connects the whole thing. Okay, let's get started. Section 1, the musical blueprint. You know, every great structure needs a solid foundation, right? Well, in music, that foundation is called the staff. The staff is really just this grid of 5 horizontal lines and the 4 spaces in between them. Honestly, the best way to picture it is like a ladder for musical notes. The higher a note is on the ladder, the higher its pitch. It's really as simple as that. And the rules for this ladder are super easy. We always count from the bottom up. Notes can either sit right on a line or they can hang out in a space. But, and this is the most important part, without a special symbol at the very beginning, these lines don't actually mean anything. They're just a ladder with no labels on the rungs, no clue where you're going.
So let's put some labels on those rungs. This brings us to Section 2, decoding the treble clef. You can think of this as building the upper floors of our musical structure.
Now, this fancy-looking symbol is the treble clef. You have definitely seen this one before. It's probably the most common symbol in all of music. And here's the really clever part. It has a nickname, the G clef. And there's a great reason for that. Look closely at that swirl at the bottom. See how it wraps perfectly around the second line? That's not an accident. It's literally telling us this line right here is the note G. That becomes our anchor point. So once we have our G anchor, figuring out the rest is a piece of cake. And to make it easy, we use these little memory tricks called mnemonics. For the notes that sit right on the lines, just remember the sentence, "Every good boy does fine." And for the notes in the spaces, it's even easier. They literally spell the word face. Okay, we've got the high notes covered. Now it's time to move on to Section 3 and master the bass clef. This is where we build out those deep, foundational low notes. And here it is, the bass clef. Just like the treble clef, it has its own secret identity. We call this one the F clef. Look closely at those 2 dots right next to the curve. They perfectly surround the 4th line from the bottom. It's the same exact logic as before. Those dots are telling us, hey, this line is the note F. It's another anchor point, just for a whole different range of sound. And of course, the bass clef has its own set of mnemonics. For the lines, a classic is, "Good boys do fine always." And for the spaces, a really easy one to remember is, "All cows eat grass." Once you have your anchor note F, these little phrases map out everything else for you. Okay, so we've built the high section and the low section. Now for Section 4, the grand staff. This is where we see the complete architectural design finally come together. So what is the grand staff? It's simply the treble staff and the bass staff joined together by a brace on the left-hand side. If you've ever looked at piano music, this is exactly what you were seeing. It's what allows a single musician to read both the high notes and the low notes at the very same time. The key is just understanding how they work together. The treble staff is always on top for the high notes, and that's typically what your right hand plays on a piano. The bass staff is on the bottom for the low notes, and that's usually played by your left hand. It's a perfect division of labor. So, we have our 2 halves of the blueprint, but how in the world do they connect? Well, that brings us to our final section, connecting it all and finding the keystone of our entire musical arch. This is the big question, right? We have this gap between the top staff and the bottom staff. What is the one thing that bridges that gap and links them together into one single continuous system? The answer is a note called middle C. And its position is just fascinating. It's just a little bit too high to fit comfortably on the bass staff, but it's also just a little too low to sit on the treble staff. So it exists in the space between them, acting as the perfect connector. To actually write middle C, we have to draw a small, temporary line just for that one note. These are called ledger lines. You can think of it like we're just adding a temporary step to the top or bottom of our ladder. Middle C sits on the first ledger line below the treble staff, which is the exact same note as the one on the first ledger line above the bass staff. It's the perfect meeting point. So there you have it. Your blueprint for reading music really just boils down to 4 simple steps. First, identify the clef. Is it a G or an F to find your anchor note? Second, use those mnemonics to find all the other notes. Third, combine them to read the whole grand staff. And fourth, just use middle C as the bridge that connects everything. That's the whole system.
So the next time you see a piece of sheet music, I want you to stop seeing a secret code. See it for what it is, a blueprint, just waiting for an architect like you to bring it to life. Now that you know how to read the plans, the only real question left is, what incredible music will you build?